Hey, you. Yeah, you. What you doing? I know what I'm doing. I'm starting my week off right with Talking About the Blues podcast, baby.
What's going on? What's going on? You are now bluesing with the number one blues broadcast in New York City. Talking about the blues, baby. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, Instagram, like the Facebook page, and subscribe to the website. Stay tuned for our live interviews, baby. Keep bluesing. What's going on, good folks? Once again, you are bluesing. We're talking about the blues. Coming to you on MDO Radio Blues. And we have a very, yet again, recurring special guest, the American Songster, Dom Flemons. What's going on, my brother?
Oh, nothing much over here, Jack. Just hanging around as usual. This time I'm actually in Washington D.C. during the snowstorm, so I'm just trying to stay warm indoors.
So let me ask you: is inside with the hot chocolate and the guitar and the banjos and the young lady? Are you inspired? What's going on?
Oh, I'm feeling very inspired here. I'm looking over at my wonderful lady over here and her big, beautiful brown eyes and her lovely smile. Just enjoying her presence, and yeah, we're just hanging out here, having some real late breakfast.
That's very groovy. That sounds like the Pearly household. I can dig it. Now, it's been brought to my attention because I recently interviewed Paul Pucciano, the founder and CEO of the Leadbelly Fest that's actually happening February 4th at Carnegie Hall. So make sure y'all, check it out. That you're co-hosting this event.
Oh yes, yeah. They booked me to do this one, and I can't wait to do it. I was fortunate enough to host the event at the Kennedy Center in Washington D.C. last year for Leadbelly's 125th anniversary. So now I'm the 126th. It's great to be able to be involved with the Leadbelly Fest and also to be at Carnegie Hall and to be able to share the stage with a lot of wonderful performers.
I dig it. So, as we all know and found out based off our last interview, for my listeners that is, you have a deep knowledge of the history of music and artists. So let's delve into that for a moment. And I guess the first question would be, knowing Leadbelly's history and its contribution to American music, African American music, American folk, and you being the American Songster, how does that feel? How important is this to you?
Oh, it's extremely important. Leadbelly is one of the guys he's kind of like, I always describe him as the Rosetta Stone of black folk music, just because he covers so many pieces of the puzzle that I don't think that a lot of musicians had a chance to really delve into in their own recorded careers. He also had this alternate career as a musician that was recorded for the Library of Congress. So he wasn't making commercial recordings. His actual commercial recordings never really sold that well. But his style was old-fashioned in a way that was appealing to John and Alan Lomax, who recorded for the Library of Congress. And he just was able to make so many great recordings documenting his whole style of music. I think it's everybody benefits from that. And he also being a person, a really powerful performer and a songster. He's actually one of the people that the term songster was placed on very early on when they started doing actual academic studies of black folk music early on. So he's one of the guys that's associated with the term songster and was one of the guys who really inspired me very early on.
I dig it. And you pretty much like him, you cover a vast genre of music. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
I do.
Yeah, and Leadbelly's unique also, just to mention it briefly, also in the way by the songs that he did have kind of they have I guess you'd even say completely uh, injected themselves into popular music culture ever since he was performing them. Then of course the people that he influenced directly, like Lee Guthrie and Pete Seeger, Brandon McGee, and Sonny Terry, all those guys, they played his songs. Burl Ives played his songs as well. And, when you think about it now, songs like Midnight Special, Goodnight Irene,
The House of the Rising Sun.
And a couple other ones, even like songs like Piccadilly Cotton, and people know those songs. Skip to My Lou. I mean, these are all songs that are now so basic as folk songs in the entire scheme of the thing. It's really hard to assess all of Leadbelly's legacy in just in kind of one facet. Because even if you haven't heard Leadbelly directly, you've probably heard one of the songs that's been most associated with him, and then somebody either in the folk genre or the rock genre or whatnot, did a version of it that people know. Even the song Black Betty, there's that disco version of Black Betty that, it's had a couple of little revivals here and there, but that's an old song that comes from Leadbelly too.
That's right. All along with that, the British invasion. I mean, the Animals with the House of the Rising Sun.
Yeah.
Which made pop culture. It comes from a very simple form of music. Now, this guy had a very, very interesting life, and he was in a very, very interesting time in America. Now, we touched on this before, so please forgive me if some of these questions sound repetitive, but it actually is relevant to the festival. What he experienced, what he endured, what he lived through, and the music that he produced out of that era, well, throughout his life for that matter, and then what's going on right now. How relevant is it to you, and do you believe that it should be relevant to people, that it's kind of a direct, there's a parallel. There's a lot going on now, maybe not as overt that was going on then.
Well, that's the thing that has been very interesting to see over the past couple of years, is a true reassessment of what Leadbelly's legacy means. Because, see, in the folk world, he's one of the true stepping stones. You cannot get past Leadbelly if you're in the folk world. Blues, you can kind of step around Leadbelly's music because it tends to be on the broader side of folk music, more so than just straight blues. But blues people also give Leadbelly respect, of course. Mm-hmm. But see, when you get into the other sort of worlds that he can reach into, like very early jazz and ragtime, those are spots where people are in a gray area. And then, of course, to connect black folk song with black folk song, his parallels with different rappers and different hip-hop artists, and kind of the journey that Leadbelly went on, is something I don't feel has truly been discussed and also brought to the attention of people that are doing rap and hip-hop. And I feel like that's something that's really a shame, because there's a lot to be learned from Leadbelly's story. Like, for one, he was he was incarcerated very early on. He had a very bad temper as a young man. So he was incarcerated for manslaughter. So it was like he had a very serious crime that he was put in prison for. And, people can look around and see what it's like for a black man to try to find a job after being incarcerated now.
Right.
We got to think back into the 1930s, even before civil rights, very, very close after Reconstruction. Those are different worlds. I mean,
Right.
those are different Americas, and Leadbelly had some stuff he had to struggle through, and I think that that's something that's really important for people to see and to hear, that there is a story of someone who was able to make something of themselves through very, very difficult situations that at first they got themselves into. But of course, Leadbelly did his best to try to show that afterward he had paid his time and that he was a respectable citizen. And even with him meeting the Lomaxes, his music came. The way they sold his music came from a place of, he comes from the natural place. He
Right.
comes from the streets. That's going to sing you authentic songs that come from his culture. And that's something that they still sell with hip-hop even to this day. I mean, it's all about talking about hard times and protesting things that are settling in current society or black culture. So it does go into broader spaces of what people in general are feeling, but definitely hip hop talks about the same Leadbelly talks about. You hear a song like Scottsboro Boys. That's a heavy protest song that is, I think, really speaks to the same culture that hip hop has grown out of.
That's interesting on several levels, because now we have what has been coined as of late, as in the last maybe 10 or so, last year or so, they've coined it the drug culture, right? With that era of 90s, early 2000s hip hop. And then you have the gangster culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that, and I agree. But I think what should be added with that is that part of his life when he was accused, or not even accused, when he was actually involved in the Communist Party and those cats that he was running with, because that also kind of correlates to the Panther world and to how a lot of people are seeing fascism. Yeah, I have a heavy tongue, y'all. Pardon me. And capitalism right now. So, to your point, his entire life embodies a struggle of oppression.
Absolutely, and it's very interesting with Leadbelly, where he's in a certain way he's kind of like he's actually very much in the griot tradition of musicians that work for hire to help praise different organizations, and those organizations help the musician too. And in that way, the left movement.
You broke up a little bit right there. I didn't catch the last statement.
Oh yeah, the left-leaning folk music movement of that time. That was Leadbelly's way of being a griot, was to help get support and the resources of that community that respected and loved Leadbelly's music, and used that for his gain to be able to do whatever he needed to. He didn't have children, but he had an apartment, and he had maintained his own life, and he did music for a living. So I mean, it's very interesting the sort of ways that he had to go about it, because he comes from a place of being an incarcerated man trying to find a job. It's not like he can just go out there and go force.
Right. This guy spent a good portion of his young manhood incarcerated.
Yeah.
And breaking rocks. That's not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah. Well, and also it's just like with him as a person, the stories you read about him talking about being even incarcerated, he was a well-respected guy because he was the guy that could lead the songs. He was the guy that was the the toughest guy that could lead a chain gang into doing this hard back-breaking work, building highways. Now we think about highways just being there, but that was mostly done on convict labor. Leadbelly was one of those guys. He was cooks Sam and working on the chain gang. Sam Cooke's singing about it in the third person, but that's Leadbelly out there.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
That's reflected in his music, of course. That's why he has so much. It's like so much power, strength, and just intensity as well. That comes from being able to be that tough of a dude, working out on the field, and then coming down and grabbing a 12-string guitar and giving you all that power in the song. And that's something. Anybody who's a fan of Leadbelly knows that right from the first time they heard it. They said, "Oh man, this is it."
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Especially a 12-string guitar. That's not like business right there. That's serious.
Oh boy, and it's interesting to read sometimes. Again, in terms of reassessment of what Leadbelly's legacy, his style isn't. It's not fancy in the way that people tend to like blues guitar. Like, people love Robert Johnson, of course.
Right.
And Leadbelly's guitar, if you put it in the gauge of Robert Johnson, it's a simpler style in terms of notes. But try to get somebody to actually play it as efficiently and as quickly as Leadbelly can play it on some of those recordings. You're not going to find many people who can do that. Because that's the thing with him, is like especially when you get a song like, like Gallus Pole, and he starts cranking into that thing. It's just like boom, 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 it's just,
right.
There's so much power in that. And musically, again, I'd put that to anybody who listens to hip hop to think about a hot DJ who can scratch really, really great stuff, and listen to Leadbelly's guitar playing, especially a song like that, or Tom Hughes' Town, which is also called Fannin Street. There's some licks he plays on the guitar that, to me, remind me of the same stuff as like a real hot DJ, like really working some stuff on the turntable. It's just, especially Tom Hughes' Town. That's a great one.
Right.
Follow me down, boom, boom. Follow me down, boom, boom. Follow me down to Tom Hughes' Town. Ooh, 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 it just has that. It has those same rhythms embedded within the music that I really think that if someone really opens their ears to listen to it, they can hear that, but it's, of course, hip, like the comparison to hip hop and folk music is tricky in a way, because hip hop is based off of taking away the musical half of folk music, but keeping the folk voice half of it and creating a new style based on artificial means of music, And I know that's always a hard thing in the comparison, because, it doesn't sound the same. But, it's two different musical cultures, even though it's a very similar vocal culture and place where it comes from,
Yeah. Well, no, I'd say that they're not necessarily different cultures. I think the commercialism, and when I say the commercialism, the way folk music is packaged and sold, and the way hip hop is packaged and sold, that's where it looks like it's different. But if you understand the cultures and where all this comes from, we're not even, just to be clear to the audience, I'm not speaking in terms of race or ethnicity, just the actual culture these musics come from and the living conditions and the purpose, right? Mm-hmm. To me, they're the same thing, because to me, folk falls right in line with call and response, prison songs, work songs, spirituals, blues, and hip hop is their great grandson or granddaughter, or
Yeah.
hermaphrodite, whatever, however you want to look at it. But
Yeah, man. I think that's something that hasn't. Again, like I said, I don't think Leadbelly has truly been reassessed by all facets of music in a true way. Because even well, the last person that really covered a Leadbelly song that really made a significant impact on popular culture was Kurt Cobain when he did Where Did You Sleep Last Night?
Right.
On the Nirvana Unplugged live in New York. And so it's been interesting to see even the advertising now is coming from Leadbelly is influenced everybody from Pete Seeger to the Beatles to Nirvana. And so it's starting to make that pathway.
Right.
But see, to me, I feel like then Kendrick Lamar will be another person who would be influenced. I'm sure the guy's heard Leadbelly before. The guy has to have heard it to be able to have made the impact that he has so far.
I'd be surprised
if he
hasn't.
That's the next step to me is like anybody from the culture of rap and hip hop being able to speak to that, or hell, if they don't do it, I'm glad to talk about Leadbelly myself.
I dig it. I mean, I would even, since we're on the conversation of hip hop, I would go as far as saying Scarface falls into that Leadbelly spectrum, because we're talking about a brother from the South that had a hot temper as well as a young man, and had a lot of parallels in life as Leadbelly, and had, whether he knew it or not, as somebody from the outside looking in, there was parallels in his song making and his content and how it was delivered, and which leads me to something I wanted to ask you when you initially brought this point up. The hip hop generation, which what I refer to is the post civil rights generation, right? And then the generation, all of these things. Though mainstream may take another route and say, okay, Leadbelly influenced these people, and this genre of music is not compared to whatever the case may be. However, to your point, if you listen to these songs, hip hop and Leadbelly, or for that matter, any music considered black music and Leadbelly, knowing that most of them may not have heard or studied Leadbelly, but there's such a direct reflection of Leadbelly in that music. Do you think that's like an Africanism that's inside of us that just has a rhythm that way?
Oh, yeah, I definitely would think so. Because that's the thing that, here's one of the things that I found that, in a general sense, I have found that has really been a roadblock for revisiting the past, and that's being country. And the idea of black people thinking that they might be country if they like something, compared to moving progressively toward the more urbanite ideas, is a real big roadblock I've found, just because with Leadbelly, see, even during his time, the reason that he had to go to these mostly Jewish, leftist, communist-leaning people in the folk community is that the black community at that time was toward the post-Harlem Renaissance. And see, when they heard Leadbelly's accent, they couldn't handle that. And they said, we can't do nothing with this dude. He's too country. And they shunned him. I mean, he hung out with people like Cab Calloway a little bit, but see, then that was a conflict that he had with John Lomax.
That's right.
Because Lomax is pushing him as a guy that's an authentic folk performer. But Leadbelly, of course, has his own ideas about wanting to be more urbanite and more progressive leaning.
Or the term back then, new Negro.
Exactly. But see, the new Negro could point out Leadbelly and say, wait a second, you're too country for us. And so even contemporary to Leadbelly's time, it was hard for black people to think about the countrified version of themselves being as valid as what came before. But that comes from a mindset of saying we're not slaves, and then there's the mindset of saying we're not uneducated, primitive savages, which is, again, the bigger culture was pushing that on folks.
Absolutely.
So they just moved away from that, the Great Migration. They moved away from that idea of blacks being primitive. And so Leadbelly is in a very interesting spot, and I still think that those mindsets are still there in the broad sense. I think that, if you have folks that are, it's like you have younger people, younger kids, they're not going to know the difference. So they can listen to it and they can find that, they can say, oh, okay, that's cool. But for folks that are older and grown, it's definitely a big roadblock that they have to step over to be able to truly understand. Because then you find out that all that stuff is not that far away, which is really the trickiest part of the whole thing, is you find that slavery and Reconstruction and even civil rights, all that stuff isn't that far away. Because, see, for Leadbelly, he knew people who were born in slavery because he was a young guy knowing people growing up that were part of that culture.
Right.
And he comes from a new culture that could move away from that. And I feel in the 21st century, we have a lot of younger people that have the same sort of situations that are coming up for them. As you mentioned, post-civil rights generation, there are a lot of extra choices, I think, that the general populace has, and Leadbelly's music speaks to that. But you have to be able to get into it and get over that roadblock of thinking it may be too country or what have you. I don't know what everybody thinks about it. Like for me, I was instantly drawn to it, but I was already drawn to folk music by that point. See, I was drawn to Bob Dylan, and he mentioned in a song called Song for Woody about Cisco, Sonny, and Leadbelly too. And I wondered, who was this Leadbelly guy? And so I looked up Leadbelly, and my life was changed from that point on,
I dig it. And I also agree and see that for the past 20 years, again, this is a great comparison to hip-hop. Now, I have to make this clear for the listeners because there are some blues enthusiasts that downplay commercial rap, right? And I have to say commercial. I have to make that distinction because I know what hip-hop is. So what happens is, like most things, everything gets grouped into this one bowl, and it's not necessarily the case. But for the past 20, 25 years, maybe at this point a little longer, actually it's a lot longer. It is a lot longer. But anyway, my point is, hip-hop, like blues, like the Leadbellys of the world, because it's hard to put him into any genre. We call him folk, but Leadbelly did a plethora of music. These spaces were looked down upon. They were frowned upon. Hip-hop was frowned upon by these those who assimilated into the pop culture because it reminded them, like you said, of a less wanted black feature, right? Which definitely correlates to the Leadbelly story, which makes him even more hip hop than a lot of the original hip hoppers. Wow, that's like eye opening right now. That's really eye opening. And to speak about that time, you kind of answered a question that I always raise to everybody who comes on the show. And whenever I have this discussion or whatever the case may be, how is it that what is called black, I'll put it this way, before I even re-raise the question, I was watching a documentary with the Funk Brothers, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right, you saw this documentary.
Yeah, Staying in the Shadows of Motown. Gosh,
Yes, sir.
Great.
Yes, sir. Great, deep, um, unfortunate. But the point I'm trying to make is, I do not remember the cat's name, but I did notice he said it first. But all of them, when they referred to music made by black folk, whatever the genre was, whether it was rhythm and blues, soul, funk, whatever it was, they always referred to it as blues. But then when they referred to um, quote unquote non-black music, they called it by its genre name, and I found that very interesting. And so back to the point, the question that I wanted to raise again: do you feel that the assimilation of the new Negro is what kind of spearheaded the separation of the black community with these musics?
Oh, well, I would say for music born out of the post-civil rights era, I would say yes. For what came before that, I'd say that there was a whole other set of circumstances that came out, particularly in Reconstruction, when you had because Reconstruction, it went on for about 10 years in the
Yes.
1870s to about the 1880s, let's say. It went a little farther than that, but it got to a spot where that's when you start having stuff like black Democrats show up compared to black Republicans.
Right.
Stuff like that started happening where you had black people who were having the resources and the knowledge to start making different choices than just following the single monolithic story that was the story everybody used. Because
Right.
that's the thing too that's tough is back then in those days, it was like if you didn't really follow the Black Party line or the Black Manifesto, you were on your own.
Right. Right. Yeah.
People, just because that comes out of the experience of the bigger culture and the bigger ideas. One person goes wrong, they say, "Oh, that's everybody," and everybody was fighting against that. And that goes back to Jack Johnson.
Right.
That goes back to Booker T. Washington,
Absolutely.
W.E.B. Du Bois, and you see them all dealing with similar situations. So it's like Leadbelly, he comes out of a really particular situation that, I think that assimilation of black singing black songs is what happened in the 1890s. I think that's the thing ragtime comes out of. So I was doing an article recently, and it blew my mind reading some of the stuff that was being read. But ragtime, if you think of this, let's put ragtime on the map, was written by a fellow by the name of Ernest Hogan. And
Ernest
the song
who?
was called Ernest Hogan.
Okay.
And he was a black vaudeville performer. And he wrote a song called All Pimps Look Alike to Me.
Mm.
And so that was the name of the song. But to become more popular, he changed the word pimps to the word that was very popular at that time for popular songs.
Right.
So the song became All Coons Look Alike to Me.
Mm.
And so the song itself, I mean, it's offensive, but if you look at the stuff of that time, it's not as offensive as other songs like every nation's got a flag except the coon. That's
Right.
That's a song.
Right. Right.
And so it's like this song, All Coons Look Alike to Me. It caused such a huge controversy because mean-spirited white people could start singing that song,
Right.
and that would get a rise out of black people. Black people were trying to that song, but yet it was so popular. It made way for Maple Leaf Rag and all those other ragtime songs at a Georgia. And it made, but the assimilation of black folk song was what led into that earlier. I think that it split black culture off to make the blues.
Mm.
And so then the post-civil rights, I think that's when, gospel music became kind of the black music was in the civil rights era. And it took black people off of folk music.
Now wait,
and the blues.
let me ask you this. Let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
That was very specific, and I dig it. So, are you saying the civil rights era is what made gospel black folks music in terms of pop culture and pop music and commercialism?
Exactly, and that's meaning new gospel music, like Reverend Thomas A. Dorsey, specifically Thomas A. Dorsey's song "Take My Hand, Precious Lord," as sung by Mahalia Jackson. See, it's like, and Mahalia Jackson is the big musical figure that kind of transcends in that era.
Absolutely.
I mean, but of course you had like people like Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and then after that, black music was based out of church music. You see that all over R&B,
right?
Soul music, and it's like blues was still popular for quite a while, but it was electrified blues, like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and stuff like that. Jimmy Reed,
Right.
Jimmy Reed kind of gets into a sort of pop area too. But
Chuck
you
Berry.
see him superseded by the Staples singers.
Right.
You see him superseded by you see that whole era get superseded by Motown, and
Right.
that kind of becomes the new era. In Memphis, you see it a lot too.
With
The
Stax.
older guys like Gus Cannon and Will Shade, they get taken over by Stax.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you see that shift happening, especially when Martin Luther King Jr. gets killed. Once he gets assassinated, that happens, because then it's like, folks that still want to keep up with Dr. King's dream is cool, but then all of a sudden you're seeing people like the Black Panthers coming out where they're saying, well, we did the nonviolence thing. We got to do something a little bit bigger than that. And hip-hop grew out of this divide
Right.
of culture, and again, that's kind of the ideological places that both of these types of music come out of. If you follow the genres, you find they point all to the same thing. That's why, like, hip-hop is like, James Brown is the main guy.
That's
James
what
Brown was,
yeah. Yeah, I was just waiting for you to finish, because I was going to bring up James Brown, because his popularity soared in that Black Panther era, because he was hollering, not, let's, and I'm not by no means saying that Martin and the music prior to that was a song of assimilation, but James Brown was hollering, be proud and take a stance as a man of who you are, and that was the Panther movement. And that, so I get it, and that's that's kind of a direct correlation to Amiri Baraka's, what I call a textbook, his view and explanation on the black experience and the musics that came out of it throughout his timeline, for that matter.
That's right. Yeah, Blues People. I mean, that's a heavy text, and that tells you a ton of. That tells you a ton about, again, the correlation. See, like, the thing I found, in the movement of Black Lives Matter, I found that actually I'd modified the phrase that Black Voices Matter, because Black voices mean a lot, and especially the documentation of being able to record those voices has changed culture again and again. And then, of course, voices don't just sing; they speak as well. So there's a lot that Black voices have been able to do through the power of speaking. And I think that that's a definite thing. Like, I remember my dad telling me for a long time, when I got into doing a lot more history stuff, he was telling me that black was not the term that you used. Negro was the term, and then colored, if you were in kind of the upper crust, you use colored, people of color. And, for James Brown to come out with "I'm Black and I'm Proud," that was, for that time, that was a big thing to be said, even though it's a dance song. See, this is where it links back to Leadbelly, too. James Brown and Leadbelly link together in that way, where it's dance music, and it's music that's made to make you get up and move and kind of say, yeah, I'm going to shake it all off. But there is a message within the music that's heavy. You sit down and listen and think about it. You're like, oh, he's saying, oh, hello. And I think that's the sort of stuff I feel like has been missing from the correlation with Leadbelly. Because again, that are documented story.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? What's
Oh,
after
sorry.
what's
Yeah.
missing?
Oh, well, what's interesting is that, you see, the people who have documented Leadbelly's story are the people within the folk music genre. And folk music itself as a genre wasn't made for a black audience. And so bringing a black audience into it, it takes its own, you just have to have your own set of education and bringing people into it that's not going to be just inherent within the music. And so I feel like that step has, and again, it has to be done by black teachers. I feel like it has to be done by black teachers. Not so much that it has to be a thing about race, but I do feel like having the educated voices to speak about this stuff and to get it out there to people is important as well, in addition to what's already out there. Because, like Pete Seeger, he's been saying that the banjo's African since, like, the early 1940s.
Right.
When I came into it with the Carolina Chop Drops, people thought it was a revelation that we were talking about the banjo being African. See, I learned that from old Pete.
Right. I dig it.
Yeah, but it's important to have us talking about it too. Being a part of the conversation. Again, black voices mattering. It's extremely important.
It is, and again, the irony of this, at least for me, and I hope the audience has this revelation as well. The more you research specific parts of history, and in this case, our history, you see that your statement is 100% correct. It is black voices. I go as far as to say I did an article on talking about the blues, not necessarily a written out article with my thoughts. However, what I wanted to show was a short story written by Langston Hughes called "The Blues I'm a Playin'." And when you go back to these guys from Amiri all the way back to after the initial Reconstruction, when the literature of black writers were dogging black people to assimilate. After that, when the community started trying to make their own name in their own way, you would see that it wasn't just music that was documenting this. It was writers that were writing poetry or writing books. It was filmmakers, right? It was at the time, I'm sure they were not called activists. I would imagine that came in the 60s as well, but they were actually early activists who were standing up and having these lectures and talks. So it has always been black voices.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like a guy like Langston Hughes, he comes from a very particular background. Like I mentioned that song, all coons look alike to me, and Ernest Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a black vaudeville performer. He was still very respected in the community, even though also at the same time everybody kind of was groaned and moaned about him having written this song, which,
right.
Again, it led to a movement finally where, in the black press, they finally said, hey, kind of like the NAACP did
right.
a couple of years back for the word nigger. They said that with coon. They said, no, don't use coon anymore. Coon's off the books. Let's not say this word or use this word in songs anymore. And you find that like a lot of songs, like Gus Cannon's songs or Jim Jackson's numbers, the ones that are based in the minstrel show, they don't use the word coon. Even if you look up the sheet music, the same songs will say the word coon in them.
Right.
And you'll find that they moved away from using that particular terminology. But to get to Langston Hughes, Ernest Hogan was part of a group called the Frogs, which were the most well-known and best paid black entertainers of that time. It included Burt Williams and George Walker, Williams and Walker.
Mm-hmm.
James Rosamond Johnson, who's James Weldon Johnson's older brother. And so James Weldon Johnson was very good friends with Langston Hughes, and all those guys were based in New York. So they were like the pre-Harlem Renaissance before the Harlem Renaissance guys came along. But see, all those, the generation before, they come from this place of being blackface performers that are wanting to transcend, to take the blackface off. But it's interesting to see the Harlem Renaissance as the true manifestation of what these other guys worked on. And these guys didn't record. So it's like you have to read the information about those guys to know that they even exist.
Right.
Mark Williams was the only one that recorded out of any of them. Oh, and James Reese Europe. James Reese Europe was the other guy that was in the Frogs. And so he was, when James Reese Europe got murdered, that was when, the pre-Harlem Renaissance guys were done for. Then people like Langston Hughes came up from the ashes of those guys' work. But I mean, they all link together. This article I did on Thomas A. Dorsey for the Oxford American, I spent so much time trying to find the beginning reference to all this stuff that I was blown away by the way that all of it connected in some way.
Wow.
There was every songwriter was connected in some way or another. Jelly Roll Morton, Fats Waller, James Reese Europe, W.C. Handy, Clarence Williams, Bessie Smith, Mamie Smith, Ralph Peer, J. Mayo Williams, Thomas A. Dorsey. All those people are connected by the industry of music for black musicians at that time.
Right.
And it was baffling. I was reading it and I was like, wait a second, it's all related? And so then Leadbelly, to get back to our original conversation on Leadbelly, he comes like from this other place of being a completely unknown, essentially, but through his being able to, do one of the greatest hustles of all time, getting out of prison and then hooking up with the Lomaxes to shoot into stardom as a musician. That's like it really gives you a good perspective on what that means, because it's just a different world. Like now that social media is coming along, there are a lot of musicians that are telling stories and a lot of entertainers, politicians, every type of story is coming out.
Right.
A lot of stories that people have never heard before.
Right.
And Leadbelly's kind of like one of those guys that links into that, because he was bringing a story that at that time was not the story that was being told to most people.
I would go as far as saying he was bringing a story that was not popular, so they didn't really want it to be told.
Exactly. Because when you really break it down, it's very interesting that Leadbelly and John Lomax only worked together for 4 months.
Right.
4 months. And that was what led to all of the documentation and stories that you read about Leadbelly now.
Imagine that.
It was a 4-month liaison. Of course, there was kind of some gray area. Leadbelly and Lomax had a falling out over various stuff.
Right.
But, and a lot of it was cultural in the way that John Lomax was progressive enough to bring Leadbelly there. But,
he was still stuck in his old...
stay in the same hotel room with him. That's not the sort of guy he was.
Right. He was still stuck in the, what is it, the Southern antebellum mind state.
Exactly. And see, and in a way, Leadbelly was okay with that, more so than what Alan Lomax. See, Alan Lomax was a bit more progressive, but Leadbelly, all the stuff we've been discussing is that the definition of certain terms changes with each generation. And especially in the book, you see, if you go from these to now, you see a lot of shifts in mindsets that sometimes can actually be kind of contradictory, because all of a sudden then you're like, well, wait a second, when you get to a certain point in the past about the mindsets that people have about it. But to be able to, you really have to sit and see, oh, here's the mindset, because people don't think about stuff like, we see a little bit of it, like, if you watch the movie Malcolm X, with
right,
straightening their hair and putting caulk in their hair, like you and I, we both came up in a time when people would conk their hair a bunch and
Right.
straighten it out. And there was a reason that they did that. But then after a certain point, it was like it was okay not to have to do that.
Right.
Compared to you had to do that, because that's what society required out of you. And it's, and again, it's different mindsets, you see. Like nowadays we have a lot more choices than we used to. But you have to acknowledge the choices that folks didn't have.
Absolutely,
You know what I mean?
absolutely. Which
It's sort of a weird sort of thing. Like especially with Leadbelly, because again, for a guy who had been incarcerated, again, the story that he's had formed around him. He was in prison and got freed, and then he was singing. The guy always made sure he was in a suit, 3-piece suit, and a bow tie, and nobody said they ever saw him outside of that ever. It was always a 3-piece suit and a bow tie.
So
I even heard that Brownie McGee and Sonny Terry, who grew up behind Leadbelly as musicians, they said that because later on you see pictures of them, they're not wearing suits anymore. But I guess they said they got so sick of wearing suits that once they died, they never back. Just because he was real specific about make sure you have your suit and your tie, make sure you're extra clean. Just because that's where he comes from. I know with Leadbelly too. If a hair was out of place, it's like I'm sure he felt socially that people could attack him, and he would be vulnerable without that specific set of clothing and attire and image that he wanted to project.
before I close out, once again, you got to let them know where to find you, and also you can let them know, plug it. Just plug the Leadbelly Fest. Plug it for them.
Awesome. Well, Leadbelly, we're going to be doing Leadbelly Fest on February the 4th at Carnegie Hall. Y'all know where that is in New York City, so make sure to swing on down. I'm going to be hosting it. It's going to be some wonderful musicians there, including Guy Davis. We're going to have Walter Trout's going to be there. Kenny Wayne Shepherd's going to be there. Eric Burden from the Animals is going to be there. Buddy Guy is going to be up in there. Josh White Jr., and then a whole bunch more. So it's going to be a huge show. So we're gonna rock at Carnegie Hall, and we're going to see if we can raise the spirit of Leadbelly and try to shake up the halls of that place.
Dig it. You heard it here first. You heard me. All right, now, once again, y'all been bluesing. We're talking about the blues. And if you don't do nothing, keep God first and keep on bluesing.